You're listening to a production of the National Media Archive. To learn more or volunteer, go to nationalmediaarchive.com.
On a Sunday morning in September 1940, the fate of Britain would be decided in the skies. For months, Britain's Royal Air Force, Fighter Command, had been locked in a brutal aerial war against Nazi Germany's Air Force, the Luftwaffe. Thousands of civilians looked to the sky and saw wave after wave of aircraft. They only had to cross the English Channel and they were here. Everyone was on the front line. Children, factory workers, retirees. The whole nation became a defence line under open skies. This wasn't just a military campaign, it was survival. September 15th, 1940, 13 hours that would define whether Britain would fall or stand. By this point, Adolf Hitler controlled almost all of Europe. Poland, Denmark, Norway, France, Belgium, the Netherlands, Luxembourg. Conquered, Britain stood alone. Hermann Goering, commander of the Luftwaffe, believed air superiority was the key. Knock out the Royal Air Force, and Germany could launch an invasion. The goal, destroy British Fighter Command. German squadrons launched repeated air raids, sending up what they called free hunts, packs of fighters to pick off British Hurricanes and Spitfires. Bomber escorts became bait. British pilots were ordered to avoid dogfights unless bombers were involved, which only fed Nazi propaganda that the Royal Air Force was on its last legs. By dawn on the 15th, that myth was about to collapse. At 6:34 a.m., Britain woke to the sound of war again. The threat of German invasion was very real. Many believed it could be just days away if Britain's defences buckled. An RAF officer once put it simply, "If they come, you'll do what you're told. And remember, take no prisoners. Shoot the bastards." Fighter Command had been split into 4 groups. Group 10 defended the southwest. Group 11 covered London and the southeast. Group 12 took the Midlands and East Coast. Group 13 had the north of England and Northern Ireland. Each group was ready. At 8:02 a.m., a single German bomber, a Heinkel, flew a weather reconnaissance mission over the English Channel. British radar picked it up immediately. Britain's early warning system, designed by Sir Hugh Dowding, was unmatched. Radar stations could see German aircraft take off from France. Information went from the radar stations to Fighter Command, then to the relevant group, then the sector stations. From there, sector controllers scrambled fighter squadrons. The Luftwaffe had no such system. That lone German bomber was intercepted. No one in its 5-man crew survived. The first casualties of the day. Meanwhile, in southeast England, most civilians were carrying on. Some were picking fruit in the countryside. Others were headed to weddings or Sunday football games. Kids played. Families gathered. But by 10:30 a.m., the Luftwaffe had other plans. German pilots were already in the air. At a strategy meeting in The Hague, Hermann Goering had been assured the Royal Air Force was collapsing. Pilots exaggerated kill counts. Some claimed to have downed 20 Spitfires in one sortie. The truth, maybe 5. But the confidence was there, and 2 massive raids were ordered. Back in Britain, Prime Minister Winston Churchill arrived unannounced at the 11-group command centre. From the observation platform above the operations table, he watched the incoming German formations being plotted in real time. Just before 11 a.m., 2 Spitfire squadrons scrambled from Biggin Hill, climbing fast over Canterbury. More squadrons followed. Suddenly, radar stations lit up. Over 200 German aircraft were inbound, heading for London. A farmer in Kent heard the roar of engines and looked up to see the sky filled with planes. A 6-year-old sprinted to his front door expecting to see soldiers. Instead, there were bombers, dozens of them, steady, slow-moving, ominous. At 11:36 a.m., the first German formations crossed the coast at Folkestone. Anti-aircraft batteries fired, but no Royal Air Force fighters met them. Yet. It reinforced the German belief that Britain was wide open. They were wrong. Observers on the ground relayed height, heading, and aircraft numbers. These reports fed straight back to Fighter Command. At 11:56 a.m., Spitfire squadrons patrolling above Canterbury spotted enemy formations. They dove straight in. German bombers had reached the skies over Kent. Behind them, clouds of fighter escorts swarmed to protect. But British fighters came in hard. To the people on the ground, it looked like chaos. Dogfights tangled above towns and farms. Trails of smoke and fire cut across the sky. Civilians scrambled into shelters. Some watched from gardens, others hid in caves. In the village of Chislehurst, families took cover in an old chalk cave system. But one boy climbed out to look and saw more Hurricanes and Spitfires than he'd ever seen in his life. At least 50, maybe more, soaring into the fight. By 12:07 p.m, the German bombers, stripped of most of their fighter escort, reached London. The city's skies were filled with the deep drone of approaching engines. The Royal Air Force had 125 fighters waiting, and they didn't hold back. The Luftwaffe faced a wall of Hurricanes and Spitfires. Bombers were hit. Crews bailed out. Some didn't make it. One pilot ejected just in time to land in the garden of what used to be a psychiatric hospital. He was immediately surrounded by an angry mob. That pilot had dropped bombs on their neighborhood. The reception was exactly what you'd expect. By 12:11 p.m, the Luftwaffe turned back for the Channel. Many bombers didn't make it. A few tried to gain speed by diving and dropping their payloads on the retreat. One dropped a bomb so close to a Kent boy that the blast nearly knocked him off his feet. He ran for the caves. Still, German commander Alois Lindmayr kept discipline. He kept his remaining formation tight. It was a tactical retreat, but it worked. Most got home. At 12:55 p.m, the all-clear sounded. London was breathing again, but just for now. Fighter command had taken hits. 18 German planes were down, 13 British fighters were lost. The Luftwaffe would be back, and they were coming bigger. By early afternoon on September 15, 1940, the fight wasn't over. Not even close. At 1:05 p.m, British radar stations picked up another massive wave forming over France. Bigger than the morning assault. This time, more than 400 enemy aircraft were inbound. This was it. The Luftwaffe was going all in. 3 German formations, thick with bombers and escorts, pushed toward the coast. Meanwhile, RAF pilots from the earlier sortie had barely returned. Many hadn't even gotten out of their cockpits. They refueled, rearmed, and went straight back up. Air Vice Marshal Keith Park ordered every available squadron into the air, again. And just like that, Fighter Command was back on the front lines, staring down another sky full of Messerschmitts, Dornier bombers, and Heinkels. There was no time for rest, and no one left in reserve. By 1:45 p.m, a lone Spitfire flew high over the English Channel. Its job? Visual confirmation of the size and direction of the incoming attack. The report came in fast. More than 450 enemy aircraft were crossing the Channel. Red alerts spread across southern England. Observer Corps confirmed what radar was already screaming. German aircraft were incoming again. At 2:14 p.m, just over Romney Marsh, 3 Spitfire squadrons made first contact. They dove straight into the enemy columns. One pilot described it as seeing hundreds of German planes coming in like a swarm. He and his squadron plunged into the bombers. He picked one, fired, and watched its engine burst into flames. Then came the German fighters. Messerschmitt 109s peeled off their bomber escort to engage. It became a free-for-all. British Spitfires and Hurricanes versus German fighters and bombers, twisting and turning through the sky in the largest single aerial battle of the war to date. German fighter pilots had been ordered to stay close to the bombers. That tactic now worked against them. Locked into tight formation, they couldn't respond freely, and RAF fighters tore through them. Bombers managed to push through to London, but the price was steep. Anti-aircraft guns opened fire. Not many, only about 200 heavy guns protected the capital, but they rattled the German formations and gave British pilots a visual marker. Smoke puffs in the sky showed them where to strike. Inside London, civilians huddled in shelters or watched helplessly from windows. One teenager stood frozen, watching streaks of contrails across the sky and bursts of smoke. His neighbour, hit by falling shrapnel, stood bloodied, confused, clothes full of holes. The chaos stretched from the coast to the city. Dogfights overhead, bombs falling, pilots firing until they ran out of ammunition or fuel. In the 11-group operations room, plotting tables were swarmed with markers. Lines, updates, frantic coordination. One observer described it like a storm, the whole sky moving as one. Prime Minister Winston Churchill was still watching. As formations clashed and German planes were picked off one by one, Churchill leaned over to Park and asked, "How many reserves do we have left?" The answer, none. Every fighter in southern Britain was airborne. This was it. By 2:45 p.m, London was under direct attack. Bombs began falling across southeast London. Fires broke out. Buildings shattered. Pickle factories exploded, sending glass and brine everywhere. One house was sheared clean in half, its wallpapered walls exposed like a dollhouse. A father pulled his child into a shelter seconds before a blast hit. He didn't survive. But his family did. RAF pilots were pushing themselves beyond exhaustion. Some flew 3, even 4 sorties that day. Adrenaline, muscle memory, and instinct kept them in the air. They were outnumbered. They didn't care. As bombers turned back for France, out of fuel and stripped of cover, British fighters chased them until command gave the order to break off. They couldn't risk crossing the Channel. German fighters sent from bases in France met the retreating bombers mid-air, but it was too late. Dozens had already been shot down. Fuel tanks were dry. Some didn't make it back. The Luftwaffe's second assault of the day had failed, but the RAF wasn't done. At 5:25 p.m., another blip appeared on radar. A final hit-and-run raid, fighter bombers targeting the Spitfire factory in Southampton. But by now the pattern was clear. British squadrons scrambled again and met them head-on. The attack was repelled. It was the last major engagement of the day. In total, between 350 and 400 German aircraft had launched 2 massive attacks on Britain. About half of them were shot down. The Royal Air Force lost 29 planes. The Luftwaffe, 79 aircraft gone. More than 130 aircrew lost. It was a brutal price, but it was also a turning point. 2 days later, Adolf Hitler postponed Operation Sea Lion, Germany's planned invasion of Britain. The Luftwaffe had failed to gain air superiority. Without it, an invasion across the Channel was off the table. Britain had survived. People would still face years of bombing raids, mostly at night. The war was far from over. But on September 15, 1940, Britain proved that it would not be conquered from the air. Pilots were cheered in shelters, saluted in the streets, and remembered in every family who made it through that day alive. September 15, 1940, the day Nazi Germany lost the Battle of Britain. What made September 15th so decisive wasn't just the aircraft totals or the fact that Hitler backed off. It was the psychological shift. It was the first time Nazi Germany took a real loss. Not just a tactical misstep, an outright failure. The Luftwaffe's assumption had been simple: bomb the British into submission, break the Royal Air Force, control the skies, cross the Channel, occupy the island. But none of it worked, because that day exposed a basic truth. Britain's defence wasn't crumbling. It was getting stronger, and everyone on both sides felt the shift. German aircrews, once smug and confident, came home shocked. Reports from pilots were grim. The skies over England weren't empty. They were packed with Spitfires and Hurricanes. They couldn't understand how the Royal Air Force had more aircraft up there than they expected, how the defence system coordinated so fast, how so many formations got intercepted before reaching their targets. The answer: there's a reason September 15th became known as Battle of Britain Day. It wasn't just a calendar date. It marked the moment when the Royal Air Force proved it could go toe-to-toe with the full force of the Luftwaffe and hold. It wasn't just the dogfights. It was the sheer number of people involved. The British air defence system was a chain, and every single link mattered. Start with radar. The early warning system gave Britain eyes miles out over the Channel. But radar didn't work alone. Observers with binoculars confirmed details. Messengers and telephone lines fed updates to command posts. Inside the 11-group operations room, young women marked aircraft movements on plotting tables. Controllers made split-second decisions. Sector stations relayed orders to airfields. Ground crews ran fuel hoses and reloaded ammunition. Pilots climbed into cockpits and took off with seconds to spare. It was mechanical, human, electrical, and completely coordinated. And the Germans had none of it. That wasn't just a tactical failure. It was a strategic blind spot. The Luftwaffe didn't understand how Britain could respond so fast with such precision again and again. They believed they were fighting a fractured system. Instead, they were hitting a wall. So the Germans shifted. After September 15th, the Luftwaffe changed its focus to bombing cities at night. Less risk, less exposure, more psychological pressure. The Blitz began, but the cost of daylight superiority was already paid, in aircraft, in pilots, in missed opportunities. It was the first time the Nazi war machine didn't get what it wanted. Invasion was off the table. Operation Sea Lion postponed, then quietly shelved. The Luftwaffe never fully recovered from that day. And Britain? Britain came out of it not just standing, but defiant, even with cities still burning. That spirit showed in the smallest moments. A mother salvaging teacups from rubble because it meant dinner could still happen. A kid digging through bomb sites for marbles and finding twisted shrapnel instead. A pilot climbing into a cockpit knowing the odds were stacked and going anyway. One survivor remembered helping fire crews pass buckets to extinguish burning buildings. Another carried tea to ambulance workers pulling people from the debris. There were no medals for those jobs, no headlines, but they kept the country running. The RAF pilots were the tip of the spear, but the whole country was the handle. And even in tragedy, there was a kind of unity. People shared bomb shelters, shared food, shared grief. Entire neighborhoods cleared glass off the streets in silence. Then opened shop the next day. By night, the blitz would start, but by morning, buses ran, bread was baked, trains moved, because to keep going was resistance. And Britain kept going. There's a quote often misattributed or overused, but on this it fit. Never in the field of human conflict was so much owed by so many to so few. Winston Churchill said it in reference to the Royal Air Force during the Battle of Britain. And he meant it. The few were the pilots, those who flew into swarms of enemy fighters, some of them again and again, in patched-up aircraft with holes in the fuselage and barely enough ammo to last 5 minutes in a dogfight. They didn't fly for medals. They flew because there was no choice. The many were the millions on the ground, the ones they protected, every school not leveled, every bridge still standing, every family that saw another day because a bomb dropped into a field instead of a hospital. That's what the pilots were defending, and that's what they saved. By nightfall on September 15th, the count was in. The Luftwaffe had lost nearly 80 aircraft. The Royal Air Force lost 29. German confidence was cracked, and Hitler had a decision to make. By the next morning, that decision was made. The invasion of Britain would not proceed. It wasn't shouted, no announcement made. But history shifted. Germany had been stopped. 4 years of war still lay ahead. Bombs would fall, cities would burn, families would lose everything. But September 15th, 1940, that was the day Britain didn't break. That was the day the skies stayed British. In the decades since, much of the focus has been on the pilots. And rightly so. The Battle of Britain was won by a few hundred airmen flying outdated aircraft against superior numbers. But it was also won by the people who built those planes, maintained them, fueled them, manned the radios, tracked the radar, took cover when the bombs fell, and carried the wounded from burning streets. It was won by every person who didn't give in, because that's what made the Battle of Britain different from other battles. It wasn't fought on distant front lines. It happened right overhead. Civilians didn't just watch it. They lived it. The front line was the backyard. The shelter was the trench. The fireman, the shopkeeper, the schoolteacher, they were all part of the defence. And they knew it. Ask anyone who lived through it, and they'll tell you the fear was real. So was the courage. It didn't come from hero speeches. It came from seeing planes overhead, hearing sirens, watching friends die, and getting up the next day anyway. It came from moments like this. A Spitfire crashing in a field, and locals rushing to pull the pilot from the wreckage. A German crew parachuting into a village and being instantly swarmed by angry civilians who had just lost neighbours to that same crew's bombs. Kids lining up to trade shrapnel like currency, because even war had its strange economy. And it came from that final hour of sunlight on September 15th, when British fighters, exhausted, low on fuel, outnumbered, still climbed into the sky. Not because they thought they'd win, but because losing wasn't an option. By dusk it was clear. The Luftwaffe had been pushed back. The Channel hadn't been crossed. Operation Sea Lion had failed before a single German boot touched British soil. Not because of luck. Not because of weather. Because the Royal Air Force held the line. What followed was a shift. The war would move. The fronts would change. But the Battle of Britain had set the tone. This wouldn't be easy for Germany. This wouldn't be a quick victory. And Britain wasn't going anywhere. That day, the world saw a country stand its ground in the face of overwhelming odds. A country that should have fallen, but didn't, and the rest of the war took note.